NFL draft is almost here for 2024. That means everything's going to change for fantasy football. We're going to review each major position, talk about all the fantasy relevant players, and why it will matter for fantasy this year. A lot of teams need a new quarterback. Let's see how many take one early. So, Chris, how do you see this position shaking out, and how is that going to have a big domino effect throughout the NFL?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that 1, 2, and 3 are going to be QB. Caleb Williams is going to go number 1, and then it's going to be Jaden Daniels or Drake May in some order. And I think all these guys are going to be drafted to be starters day one right away. But that doesn't necessarily mean you want them as your fantasy starter, because for every CJ Stroud, there's plenty of Bryce Young, Zach Wilson, Sam Darnold, guys that don't really contribute for fantasy right away. So I think the one guy I might feel the best about in fantasy is Jaden Daniels because of that rushing upside. I also like Caleb Williams. I just think he's that good and he's going to have a lot of weapons. Drake May's the one that I'm probably not really going to target too much in fantasy. And then when we drop down a little bit, I think J.J. McCarthy is going to go a lot earlier than people think. I think teams are going to view him as a pro-ready quarterback, but I don't think that's going to mean you want him in fantasy. I just don't really see a ton of upside for him. And then I think maybe in day 2, we could see guys like Michael Penix and Bo Nix get drafted. And unless they go somewhere great, and other guys I'm probably going to be avoiding. So really for fantasy, it's going to mostly be Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels as the only guys I want this year. But I think we are going to see plenty of quarterbacks drafted fairly early.
I think we'll see as many as 5 quarterbacks taken on day 1. Of course, Caleb Williams is going to be the 1-1. And look, as easy as it sounds to just say, look, number 1 pick, franchise QB, we already know this is in the bag. How many number 1 picks have we seen just become busts, or at the very least disappointments? There's no sure thing in the NFL. I do like Caleb Williams, I'll say that. I do think he's the only one I would feel even comfortable drafting in a redraft league for fantasy football. He's going to have plenty of weapons around him, and that's the main thing, right? This Bears offense will actually finally be legit. And then as far as Daniels, I mean, this is all risk reward, but I don't think I'll ever really feel comfortable with him in fantasy, even if he lands in a great spot, which I guess the best spot possible for the teams that need a quarterback might be the Commanders, but even then, it's not like that guarantees anything. I'm coming around on Drake May. I think that he might actually wind up being one of the best of this bunch, but in fantasy, I'm not sure if that's going to be enough to interest me. Michael Penix, if he lands in the right spot, and if he does go in round 1, as I think he might, then he actually could be the biggest surprise here, but I just don't think the ceiling is that high. And as far as Bo Nix, well, I just don't know if he's even viewed as a starter in this league. I think a team that's really desperate might pull the trigger here, but if not, might wind up being a backup. Tight end is going to be a lot easier this year. We had a great class in 2023, and this year it's one guy who stands above the crowd. It's the unicorn. Is Brock Bowers really that guy?
We're going to find out. I certainly think he's worth drafting in fantasy. I do feel like if he goes to a good spot, which he probably will, he might get overdrafted in fantasy, especially after what Sam Laporta did last year. But he should be good this year. I will say there's one other guy, Jatavion Sanders. No, I don't think you need to draft him in your redraft leagues, but if you're doing best ball leagues like we are, I think he's a good late round tight end.
Yeah, I hate to go all in on a tight end. Maybe we're just undervaluing Bowers and what he could be. If he lands in the right spot, then yeah, I think he's draftable. Honestly, there's no other tight end that really stands out to me at all. I think this is going to be the opposite of last year's class. I'd say if there's one deep league kind of flyer to take, and by flyer, I mean either in a dynasty rookie draft or in a best ball draft, might be Reed Sinnett. But other than that, probably just going to not worry about tight end after Bowers. Running back just isn't a priority for teams like it used to be, but that doesn't mean there isn't any value here. So how do you see the running back position shaking out this year?
Well, I've talked about it a lot. I love Trey Benson. I think he's the RB1 in this class. I think he's a true 3-down back. He can do everything. He can catch passes, and if he lands in a great spot like Dallas, he could absolutely smash. I also think Jonathan Brooks might be better than Trey Benson, honestly, but he's coming off a very late season ACL. So going to be very curious to see where he lands, but I think he could be a second half type of guy. And then Jalen Wright is one of these wild cards I think has tons of upside, but also tons of risk. But if he lands in a good spot like Chargers, obviously got to be all in. And then when we look at a little bit deeper, I also like Blake Corum, but he's going to be very landing spot dependent. I mean, a lot of running backs are, but Blake Corum, one of these guys, I think he's better than people think he is, but not elite. So he really is going to need a good spot. And then when we go a little deeper, some names I really like. Isaiah Guerrero, who smashed the combine, and I had to go and actually watch him because I had never heard of him before. He's an interesting one to me because he looks kind of hesitant in the hole. Like that speed doesn't show up until he gets like out in the open space and really gets going. But also he's got the size speed combo. I think maybe the NFL will fall in love with him and he'll go a bit earlier. And then a couple later round guys that I'm curious to see who maybe they're going to go undrafted and then I'm going to have no interest in them, but maybe they'll surprise. It's Will Shipley and Dylan Law, both good running backs, both good pass catching backs, who I think if they land in good spots could surprise.
Well, if it's one thing that I've learned over the last couple of years, especially doing so many dynasty leagues, is running back is all about opportunity. So it's hard to really form a firm opinion for myself as far as what to think of these running backs this year or going forward because it matters so much where they play. But I do agree that Trey Benson is the number one running back to me. He's maybe the only guy in this class that could be a 3-down back, at least right away. Brooks has that upside, but also that risk due to injury. Another guy I do like because I'm also sort of just assuming the Chargers go ahead and take Blake Corum, so reuniting him with Jim Harbaugh. But even so, I think Corum is a guy who can definitely be productive. You know, he's not going to be the most explosive runner, but he could be kind of a do-it-all back, a grinder that winds up being surprisingly effective. And then if you're looking ahead down the road for a guy who could eventually make an impact, don't think right away, is Braylon Allen. Obviously, coming from Wisconsin as a running back, that's pretty good pedigree right there. Super young, but also he does have some upside. Might not be a guy who interests you in a redraft league, but somebody I'm going to keep a close eye on. And then a guy I want to say I just don't really have interest in is Audric Estime. This is also a cautionary tale because he reminds me a lot of another former Notre Dame running back that I had absolutely no interest in, and that's Kyron Williams. Very similar in a lot of ways, but this is also a reminder that opportunity is so important. The last guy I want to mention that I do have on my watch list, depending on landing spot, is Marshawn Lloyd. So someone kind of going under the radar that I'm really curious to see where he ends up. And then the glamour position is still wide receiver. So many guys that could possibly have a huge fantasy impact here. So where do you start?
I mean, you got to start with the big three: Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze. I mean, as long as they don't land with either the Giants or the Bears, even though the Bears could be good long term, you're going into an offense that already has DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. As long as they don't land there, I'm pretty much going to be all in on these guys. Then when we go down to the next tier, I really like A.D. Mitchell. I think he profiles as a true X receiver, a number one wide receiver in an offense. I like Brian Thomas Jr. as well. They're kind of neck and neck for me. And then I think Xavier Leggett is kind of going under the radar here. I think he's the kind of guy that NFL teams will fall in love with. I think we could see him being drafted above some other wide receivers that people think he won't get drafted over. And then when we get to the later guys, I've talked about Ladd McConkey a lot. I keep drafting Ricky Pearsall over and over in our underdog drafts. I think he's going to be one of the steals of this draft for whoever drafts him in real life and in fantasy. And then another name I really want to see where he goes, I like his potential, is Malachi Corley. Yeah, he's got some risk, and he's very situation dependent. But, man, if he lands in the right situation, kind of like Tank Dell last year, he could have similar production.
So I should have mentioned this with running back, but I kind of feel the same way at receiver. Whichever player, early round player, lands with the Giants, I'm going to have to move down on. And whoever goes to the Cowboys, I'm going to have to move up. That goes for running back and receiver. I'm not sure if they'll pull the trigger early, but don't be surprised if those teams do address those positions. Well, as far as those big three, like you said, they should be pretty much landing spot proof, unless it's the Giants. And then as far as the next set of guys, we don't really know who's going to round out the end of the first day of the draft and who's going to make it to day two. I'll say that regardless of where he goes, I think Troy Franklin could be an effective player. I think he's somebody who might be a little undervalued by scouts, but has all the tools necessary to succeed. Xavier Worthy, I was really big on, and then he had that amazing 40 time. I think he is going to really depend on the right situation to make sure he gets funneled targets. So somebody I'm actually moving down a little bit on my board personally for fantasy. And then there's a receiver I really want to talk up. I think could surprise, although it really shouldn't be surprising. Jermaine Burton has done nothing but produce in college, playing for some big programs, a big downfield threat. I really like Burton, and I'm hoping that he lands in a good situation. And then a guy that I'm really just not interested in at all, no matter where he lands, is Keon Coleman. I think that he's going to slide in the draft. I think he should slide down rankings too. So not somebody I am on top of whatsoever. And then finally, Jalen Polk is going to get overshadowed by his teammate Rome Odunze, but don't be surprised if he winds up being just as productive. Well, okay, maybe not that good, but close to being as productive eventually in the pros. Where will all those big name rookies wind up? Well, we have some thoughts on that, and we broke it all down right here.